Dayo's heart pounded as the plane touched down at Murtala Muhammad International Airport. She gripped the armrest, inhaling deeply, trying to suppress the anxiety creeping up her spine. Lagos, the city she had once called home but had desperately tried to escape. 2 years had passed since she left for the United Kingdom to earn her master's degree in psychology, and she had hoped, prayed, that she would never have to come back. But fate had other plans. As she exited the airport, the familiar chaos of Lagos swallowed her whole. Hawkers shouted at passengers, taxi drivers fought for attention, and the thick, humid air clung to her skin. She searched the crowd for a familiar face, but none appeared. Her father, Chief Dayo, had promised to send a driver, but deep down she had known not to expect one. He was either too busy or had simply chosen not to make an effort. With no other choice, Sarah hailed a cab. As the car sped through the bustling streets, she watched the city flash past her, yellow danfos weaving dangerously through traffic, the smell of roasted plantains and suya filling the air. Billboards advertising luxury estates that few could afford. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. When she finally arrived at her family's estate, the grand gates loomed over her like a silent warning. The mansion was just as she remembered, pristine, intimidating, and suffocating. Stepping inside, she was greeted not with warmth, but indifference. Her stepmother, Bose, barely acknowledged her, only offering a clipped, "Welcome." Her father was in his study and their reunion was brief. A nod, a murmured greeting. Then he returned to his documents as if she had never left. Something was off. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. And when she overheard her father and stepmother whispering heatedly in the kitchen later that evening, she knew whatever had brought her back to Lagos was far worse than she had imagined. Sarah Dayo had always been an observant person. It came naturally to her, especially after years of studying psychology. She had a way of reading people, sensing tension, noticing the little things others overlooked. And right now, something in the Dayo household was very wrong. Ever since she returned home, the air in the mansion had been thick with something unspoken. It was in the way her father avoided looking her in the eyes, how he barely spent time with her. It was in the way Bose, her stepmother, gave her sharp glances before quickly masking them with indifference. And then there were the whispers. She had caught them twice now, her father and Bose standing close together, speaking in hurried, hushed voices. The first time she had been heading down for breakfast, when she heard their voices drifting from the study. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something about their urgent tones made her pause outside the door. "You're really going through with this?" Bose's voice was sharp, almost disbelieving. "You're actually selling her off like some market commodity?" Sarah frowned, pressing her ear closer. Her father sighed heavily. "I have no choice." "No choice?" Bose scoffed. "You always have a choice, Tunde, but like always, you're choosing the company over your own daughter." Sarah's stomach twisted. What were they talking about? "I did everything I could," her father said, his voice weary. "I took loans. I made calls. I begged investors. No one would help. Collins was the only one who offered a solution." Sarah's breath hitched. Collins? The name wasn't unfamiliar. Everyone in Lagos knew Collins Aboyi, the billionaire who had built an empire from nothing. The man who was feared as much as he was admired. Sarah had read about him in business journals, seen his name in headlines, but never had she imagined that her father would have any dealings with him. Bose let out a bitter laugh. "So what? He just swooped in like some demon and demanded our firstborn in exchange for clearing your mess?" Sarah's heart pounded. "What?" Her father didn't respond immediately. Then after a long pause, he said, "He gave me until the end of the month." "The date passed, Bose. You know what kind of man he is. I can't repay him. He wants what is owed." Silence, then Bose whispered, "And that means giving him Sarah." Sarah's breath hitched. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Giving him Sarah? What the hell was that supposed to mean? Just then, her father's voice turned urgent. "Quiet! What if she hears you?" Sarah took a step back, her heart racing. She had heard enough. Whatever they were talking about, she did not want to know. She turned and quickly walked away, pretending she had never been there. The second time it happened, it was late at night. Sarah had gotten up to get a glass of water when she heard them again, this time in the kitchen. "You don't even know what kind of man he is," Bose was hissing. "You're handing her over to a monster." "He's not a monster," her father replied, but there was no conviction in his voice. "He's just powerful. Sarah will be fine." "Oh, really?" Bose snapped. "And if she isn't? If he breaks her? If he ruins her?" Sarah's grip tightened around the glass of water. She had heard enough. This time she stepped forward. The moment she entered the kitchen, both of them immediately fell silent. Her father turned away, reaching for a cup like he hadn't just been arguing. Bose pursed her lips and crossed her arms, avoiding her gaze. Sarah frowned. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Bose said too quickly. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Really? Because the last 2 times I walked into a room, you both went quiet. That doesn't seem like nothing to me." Her father forced a tired smile. "Just business matters, Sarah. Nothing for you to worry about." Lies. But Sarah was too exhausted to press further. She had already been feeling uneasy since returning home. Maybe she was overthinking things. She shook her head and muttered, "Fine." Then she turned and walked away. But the unease never left her. Whatever they were hiding, she had a feeling she wouldn't like it. The next morning, Sarah was still unsettled. Something was off in the house, and last night's argument only made her suspicions worse. She barely touched her breakfast. Her father wasn't at the table, and Bose sat across from her, eating silently. The tension was thick. So thick it was suffocating. Just as Sarah was about to excuse herself, there was a knock at her door. She frowned. "Come in." Her father stepped inside, looking old. She had never seen him like this before. His once confident posture was slumped, his eyes dull, his face tired. He looked like a man defeated. "Sarah," he said quietly, sitting at the edge of her bed. Sarah's heart thumped. She already knew whatever he was about to say would change everything. "I need to talk to you," he began. She folded her arms. "About what?" He exhaled deeply. "I need you to listen carefully and not react emotionally." Sarah's frown deepened. "Dad, you're scaring me." He ran a hand down his face, then looked at her with haunted eyes. "Sarah, I've made a terrible mistake. A mistake that I can't fix." Her stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" He swallowed hard. 2 years ago, I made some bad investments. I thought I could turn them around, but things only got worse. I was losing everything. I needed help, and the only person willing to give me the money I needed was Collins Aboyi." Sarah went still. "I took a huge loan from him, Sarah, and I signed a contract agreeing to pay it back in a year." His voice cracked. "But I failed." She stared at him, numb. "So what does that have to do with me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down at his hands. Then he whispered, "Collins doesn't want money anymore. He wants a wife." Silence. Sarah blinked. "What?" Her father lifted his gaze. His red-rimmed eyes were filled with regret. "He wants you, Sarah." His voice was barely audible. "That's the price for my debt." For a moment, Sarah couldn't breathe. Everything around her blurred. The walls of her room seemed to close in. She heard his words, but her brain refused to process them. No, this couldn't be real. Her father had promised he would never let her suffer. But here he was, selling her off to a man she had never met. Tears burned her eyes as she choked. "Tell me you're lying." Her father lowered his head. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." Her world shattered. Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her body numb. The weight of her father's words crushed her chest like a boulder. "Collins Aboyi wants you. That's the price for my debt." She felt sick. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone. She didn't know what she expected. Maybe an escape plan, maybe just a listening ear. But there was only one person she could call. Tara. Her best friend picked up almost immediately, her voice groggy from sleep. "Sarah, babe, are you okay?" That was all it took. The dam broke. A sob tore through Sarah's throat, the tears she had been holding back spilling down her cheeks. Tara? Don't know what to do. There was a shuffle on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Sarah, babe, talk to me. What happened? Sarah wiped her face, trying to catch her breath, but the words felt impossible. It's my dad. Hey, he sold me, Tara. He... What? Sold you? Tara's voice turned sharp with panic. What the hell are you talking about? Sarah swallowed hard, gripping her phone tighter. Colin's Aboyi. My dad took a loan from him, and now he's making me marry him to settle the debt. Silence, then Tara whispered, No. Sarah let out a shaky breath. It's real, Tara. It's happening. I don't have a choice. The silence stretched. Then suddenly, Tara was crying too. Oh, Sarah, no, 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 no. This can't be happening. There has to be another way. You can't do this. Sarah closed her eyes, letting her tears fall freely. What am I supposed to do? If I run, he'll destroy my father. If I refuse, he'll take everything. Tara sniffled on the other end. This isn't fair. You don't deserve this. You worked so hard, Sarah. You had dreams, your own life, and now he's taking that away from you? Sarah felt hollow. It's already been taken, Tara. They stayed on the phone for hours, crying, talking, mourning the life Sarah was about to lose. But no matter how many words were spoken, no matter how many, I'm so sorry, Tara whispered, one fact remained. There was nothing she could do to stop this. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling like a ghost, a shell of herself. She had spent the entire night crying, her body heavy with exhaustion. But sleep had brought no relief. She had been preparing herself to meet a monster, some old, wicked businessman with graying hair and a cruel smile. Maybe someone with a pot belly, a thick cigar between his lips. The type of man who would see her as nothing but an object. But when the convoy of sleek, black SUVs rolled through the mansion gates, she quickly realized how wrong she was. From the first car, men in black suits stepped out. Security, no doubt. They moved with precision, scanning the area as if they expected a war to break out at any moment. Then the back door of the second car swung open. Sarah stopped breathing. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that fit him like a second skin. His white dress shirt was crisp, his watch gleaming under the morning sun. Everything about him oozed power, the kind that made people tremble in his presence. His features were sharp, sculpted from stone and arrogance. A strong jaw, high cheekbones, and dark, piercing eyes that looked straight through her. His short black hair was neatly styled, and when his gaze met hers, she felt the air in her lungs vanish. This was Colin's Aboyi. Sarah had expected a demon, but instead she was met with a man who looked like he had been handcrafted by the gods. A very dangerous man. For a second, she forgot how to speak. Then before she could even gather her thoughts, he spoke. This will be quick. His voice was deep, smooth, but completely emotionless. Sarah's fingers clenched into fists. She hated how he spoke to her, as if she was just an inconvenience. Collins took a step closer, his hands in his pockets, his dark eyes studying her, like she was a deal he had already signed. The wedding is in 1 week, he said flatly. I don't care if you like it or not. This is happening. Sarah's anger ignited. She glared at him. You can't just... I can. His voice was sharp, final. Your father owed me a debt, and now you are the price. Her jaw clenched. I am not an object. Collins tilted his head slightly, as if amused by her defiance. No, you're not, but you are mine now. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The way he said it, calm, indifferent, as if it was an undeniable truth, made her feel powerless. She took a step back, but he followed. I won't force you, he continued, his voice quiet but laced with authority. But you will marry me, and you will do as I say. Sarah shook her head. I hate you. His lips curled slightly. Not a smile, but something close, something dangerous. I don't need your love, Sarah, he murmured. I just need your obedience. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. He watched her for a moment longer, then turned to leave. As he walked away, Sarah felt her world collapse around her. 1 week. In 1 week, she would lose herself forever. The day had arrived. Sarah stood in front of a massive, gilded mirror, dressed in the most breathtaking wedding gown she had ever seen. But it wasn't hers. She hadn't chosen it, hadn't picked the lace details or the pearls that adorned the bodice. She hadn't walked into a boutique with excitement, flipping through designs with her bridesmaids. Everything about this day had been forced upon her. She looked like a bride, but she felt like a prisoner walking to her execution. The fabric of the gown was heavy, suffocating, just like the weight in her chest. Her hair was styled in long, elegant waves, her makeup flawless, her dark brown skin glowing under the soft lighting. Anyone looking at her would have thought she was the picture of perfection, but if they looked closer, they'd see the pain in her eyes. Sarah couldn't stop crying. Tara held her tightly, her arms wrapped around Sarah as she sobbed into her shoulder. "I'm sorry," her best friend whispered over and over again, her own voice breaking. "I wish I could stop this." Sarah knew crying wouldn't change anything. The moment she stepped out of this room, her fate would be sealed. But she couldn't help herself. "I can't do this," Sarah whispered, gripping Tara's dress like it was the only thing keeping her standing. "I can't, Tara, Tara shushed her, rocking her gently like a mother comforting a child. "I know, babe, I know." The door opened. Sarah's body stiffened as her father walked in. Chief Tunde Dayo looked 10 years older, the guilt in his eyes impossible to miss. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably before speaking. "It's time, Sarah." Sarah let out a sharp, bitter laugh through her tears. "Oh, it's time. Wonderful. Let's go give me away, shall we?" Her father flinched. "Sarah." But she wasn't in the mood for his regret. She wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and let Tara fix her makeup. If she was going to walk down that aisle, she wouldn't do it looking broken. Minutes later, she stepped out of the bridal suite, her father by her side. The moment the doors opened and she saw the grand church filled with people, her stomach dropped. Colin stood at the altar, completely emotionless. The music played, people smiled, and Sarah? She was drowning. With every step down the aisle, she felt her life slipping away. Her father's grip on her arm was tight, almost apologetic. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. When they reached the altar, Chief Dayo placed her hand in Collins's large, warm one. Sarah didn't look at him. She couldn't. The priest spoke, but she barely heard a word. "Do you, Sarah Dayo, take Collins Aboyi as your lawfully wedded husband?" She hesitated. For a brief, desperate moment, she thought of running. But when she glanced at her father's face, at the fear and exhaustion in his eyes, she knew she couldn't. So with the last shred of her will, she whispered, "I do." Colin's voice was steady, unbothered, like he hadn't just stolen her life. "I do." And just like that, Sarah was no longer Sarah Dayo. She was Sarah Aboyi, bound to him, forever. The reception was a grand, extravagant affair, one of the most expensive Lagos had ever seen. Everything sparkled. The chandeliers, the crystal glasses, the luxurious silk drapes, the floral arrangements that probably cost more than her entire college tuition. But Sarah didn't care. She was numb. People danced, laughed, and celebrated like this was a joyous occasion. But for her, it was a funeral. Then came the wine. At first, it was just a sip, something to help calm her nerves. But soon, one glass turned into two, then three. Then, she stopped counting. She had never been much of a drinker, but tonight she wanted to forget. Tara kept trying to stop her. "Babe, slow down. You're going to get sick." Sarah laughed, a hollow, empty sound. "I'm already sick, Tara. I just married a man I don't know. A man who owns me." She downed another glass, her vision blurring. The rest of the night was a fog. At some point, she thought she saw Collins watching her, his dark eyes unreadable. Did he care? No. She barely remembered the speeches, the cutting of the cake, the first dance. Everything melted together in a haze of music and dizzying lights. The last thing she remembered was being led to a car. The next thing she knew, she woke up in a place she didn't recognize. Sarah's head pounded. She groaned, shifting beneath the softest sheets she had ever felt. Slowly, she blinked her eyes open, wincing at the bright sunlight spilling through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. Wait, where the hell was she? She sat up, her fingers sinking into the plush, oversized bed. The room was breathtaking. The walls were a sleek shade of ivory, the floors a polished, dark wood. A golden chandelier hung above, casting soft light across the space. The furniture was modern, expensive, and the entire room smelled of rich leather and fresh vanilla. This wasn't her father's house. This wasn't a hotel. This was Colin's Aboyi's home. Panic seized her chest. Her wedding gown was gone, replaced with a silky nightgown she didn't remember changing into. Had someone undressed her? Had he touched her? Sarah's heart pounded as she scanned the room, and then she saw him. Collins. Standing near the window, dressed in a crisp white shirt with the top button undone. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong, veined forearms. His hands were tucked into his pockets, his dark eyes watching her with an unreadable expression. Her throat went dry. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he finally said, "You're awake." Sarah's hands gripped the sheets. "Where am I?" Collins took a slow step toward her. Our home. Our home." The words felt so wrong. Sarah swallowed, trying to steady her voice. "Did you?" She hesitated, looking away. "Did you touch me?" He tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the question. "No." His voice was calm. Too calm. "You were drunk. I had the maids take care of you." Relief flooded her, but only for a second, because then he added, "But make no mistake, Sarah." He took another step closer, his voice dangerously quiet. "You belong to me now." Sarah's stomach dropped. This was just the beginning, and there was no way out. Colin's Aboyi sat behind the grand mahogany desk in his home office, fingers steepled, eyes locked on the city skyline through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. The lights of Lagos twinkled below, like a sea of restless stars. But his mind was far from admiring the view. The marriage had happened. Sarah Dayo was now Sarah Aboyi. He had expected to feel satisfaction, victory even. After all, this was what he wanted, what he demanded. Instead, all he felt was a strange, unfamiliar weight sitting on his chest. He had seen the way she looked at him when she walked down that aisle like he was the end of her world. And maybe he was. Collins leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a brief second. He had not chosen this marriage on a whim. Nothing Colin's Aboyi did was without reason. In his world, power was everything. Strength, ruthlessness, control. These were the things that determined who survived in the high-stakes game of business. And weakness? Weakness was a death sentence. Over the years, he had learned that when a man owed you, when he failed to deliver, the only way to maintain dominance was to take something from him, something valuable. For Chief Tunde Dayo, that was Sarah. Collins had seen her once, only in pictures. He hadn't needed to know her personally to know she was her father's greatest treasure. A brilliant young woman with a promising career, a mind of her own, a future she had built far away from Nigeria. She was a price too high, which made her the perfect choice. Collins opened his eyes, his gaze cold. When the time came for Chief Dayo to repay his debt, he had made it clear. Money was no longer enough. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the principle a man like him could not be seen as merciful, or his enemies would eat him alive. So he had taken what mattered most. But what he hadn't expected was the way she had looked at him that day. Collins exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple as the memory of the wedding replayed in his mind. He had stood at the altar, waiting, unbothered. This was just business, just another transaction. And then she walked in. The moment he saw her, his bride, he felt it. The sting. She had been beautiful, heartbreakingly so, but it wasn't her beauty that had unsettled him. It was the way her eyes were filled with devastation. She hadn't hidden it, hadn't masked the pain. And for the first time in years, Collins had felt something he didn't recognize. Guilt. It was a foreign, unwelcome feeling. A weakness he had no use for. But still, it had been there as she said her vows, her voice barely above a whisper, as her fingers trembled when she slipped on the ring, as her lips pressed into a tight, resigned line when he kissed her just for show, nothing more. That sting in his chest had lingered. Even now, it hadn't gone away. Collins leaned forward, opening one of his drawers. He pulled out the contract, the signed agreement that sealed Sarah's fate. He could have chosen anything, her father's company, his properties, his shares. But he had chosen her, and now she was his. Collins had made himself one promise. He would never force her to love him, even though he had forced her to marry him. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. A message from Desmond, his right-hand man. The board has accepted the merger, but you should know, some of your competitors are watching closely. They think your marriage to Sarah is a sign of personal weakness. They expected you to crush Chief Dayo completely. They think you've gone soft. Collins scoffed. Soft? Let them think whatever they wanted. He had never been soft. His jaw tightened as he typed a reply. Let them watch. They'll learn soon enough that nothing has changed. He tossed the phone aside, his thoughts returning to her. Sarah, the woman who now wore his name, the woman who despised him. Collins sighed, leaning back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The damage had already been done. There was no going back now. Collins Aboyi was not a man who second-guessed himself. Every move he made was calculated, precise, and deliberate. Every decision was driven by power, by logic, not by emotions. Never by emotions. But as he stood at the altar that day, watching his bride walk toward him with sorrow carved into her soul, something in him shifted. It was small, like a sting of a needle, a sensation he wasn't used to. He had expected resistance from her, maybe even anger, but the pure devastation in her eyes was something he had not anticipated. Collins had always believed in taking what was owed, and Sarah Dayo was owed to him. He had taken her like a businessman claiming a debt. It had been a simple transaction in his mind, a necessary move to maintain his reputation. But as she stood before him, eyes hollow, lips pressed tightly together, body trembling ever so slightly in her wedding gown, he felt a foreign emotion creeping into his chest. Regret? No, it couldn't be. He was not a man who regretted anything. Still, when he slipped the ring onto her delicate finger, when her whispered "I do" sounded more like a death sentence than a vow, something unsettled him. But he couldn't stop it. He couldn't go back on his word. So he went through with it. He married her. He bound her to him. The first night after the wedding, Collins did not return to their bedroom. He had no intention of forcing Sarah into anything more than what had already been taken from her. He might have made her his wife, but he would not make her his prisoner in bed. Instead, he made sure she had everything she needed. The maids were instructed to tend to her every request. Whatever she wanted, she was to have. The best clothes, the finest meals, luxury at her fingertips. But there were rules. She could shop, but she would never go alone. The chauffeur took her anywhere she desired, but never without security following her. She was allowed to roam the mansion, but she was never allowed to leave its gates unless permitted. Sarah had been placed in a gilded cage, and she hated it. Collins knew she barely saw him. He made sure of it. He stayed out late, buried himself in work, and when he returned, she was already asleep. If she wasn't, he would walk straight past their bedroom and into his own, making it clear that he would not share a bed with her. It wasn't because he didn't want to. It was because he knew she didn't. Even though he had forced her into marriage, he wouldn't force her to love him. Collins had always taken what he wanted. But this time he would wait, even if she would never want him at all. Sarah sat in the enormous, high-ceiling bedroom, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the silk sheets. The mansion was eerily quiet, like a place that had never been meant to hold warmth or life. She felt like a ghost in it, a trapped ghost. Days had passed since the wedding, and she had barely seen Collins. He was gone before she woke up, home long after she was asleep. When they did cross paths, he acted as though she didn't exist, never acknowledging her presence more than a simple nod. She should have been relieved. After all, she didn't love him. He didn't love her either. This marriage wasn't built on affection. It was a transaction. But if that was the case, why had he taken her? Why had he demanded that she be his wife? If he didn't want her, if he didn't even try to make this a real marriage, then what was the point? Sarah exhaled sharply and stood from the bed. The longer she stayed in this house, the heavier the weight in her chest became. She wandered down the long hallways, past the cold marble floors and extravagant chandeliers, and into the mansion's massive library. The one place she could find some peace. She ran her fingers along the neatly stacked bookshelves, her mind a storm of unanswered questions. Was this her life now? A wife in name only to a man she barely knew? A man who refused to even look at her? Sarah had tried to hate him, but the truth was, she didn't even know him enough to hate him. That was what bothered her the most. The suspense, the not knowing. She had been given no explanation, no reason why he had chosen her. He had simply taken her, and that terrified her more than anything. Collins watched her wherever he was. The mansion had cameras everywhere, hidden, undetectable, strategically placed to capture everything. And he watched. He watched her sit in the garden, flipping through a book she never seemed to finish. He watched her in the kitchen, refusing to let the chefs cook for her, instead choosing to prepare her own meals, like she was still living an ordinary life. He watched her roam the hallways aimlessly, her mind far away, her body here but her spirit somewhere else. He watched the way she barely touched anything that belonged to him. She had never once spent his money. She had never once made a demand. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. Collins had taken Sarah because that was how he operated. When someone failed him, he took from them the thing they valued most. And for Chief Dayo, that had been Sarah. But now that she was here, now that he had her under his roof, something unexpected was happening. She was getting to him. Collins leaned back in his office chair, eyes locked on the security feed as she sat on the library floor, back against the bookshelves, lost in thought. She was so different from the women he had been with before. They had all come to him willingly, eager for his wealth, for his power, for his influence. But Sarah, she didn't want anything from him, and that unsettled him in a way he wasn't prepared for. Collins exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. He had thought this marriage would be simple. Take the girl, own the girl, forget the girl. But Sarah Dayo was becoming a problem, because the longer she was here, the more he found himself watching her, the more he found himself wondering. And Collins Aboyi didn't wonder about anyone, until now. Collins Aboyi had never been a man who fixated on anyone. He was a man who controlled, not only his empire, but the people around him. He made decisions based on logic, not feelings. He did not waste time thinking about people who didn't serve a purpose in his world. But Sarah, she was becoming a distraction. And distractions were dangerous. It started subtly at first, small moments where he found himself watching her longer than he should. He told himself it was nothing, just idle curiosity. But soon it became more than that. Every time he opened the security feed, his eyes automatically searched for her. And when he found her, he couldn't look away. She spent hours in the garden, sitting under the shade of a tall tree, completely lost in whatever book she was reading. Collins had never seen someone so captivated by mere words on a page. Sometimes she would put the book down, close her eyes, and just breathe. And for reasons he couldn't understand, that moment always made something tighten in his chest. It was the first time he had seen someone truly at peace in his house. But it wasn't peace, it was escape. She wasn't enjoying the garden. She was using it to forget where she was. The thought unsettled him. Then there was the kitchen. It had infuriated the chefs at first. She was a billionaire's wife. She was supposed to sit in luxury and have meals served to her, not take over the kitchen like a common housemaid. But Sarah didn't care. She baked, she cooked. She moved around the kitchen with an ease that fascinated him, humming softly under her breath as she measured flour, cracked eggs, kneaded dough. Collins had watched her one afternoon through the security cameras as she spun around to a song only she could hear, dancing as she mixed batter in a bowl. She had laughed, a real genuine laugh. It had caught him off guard, that sound, so pure, so unlike anything in his house. And for the first time since she had arrived, she had looked happy. That was when Collins realized something dangerous. Sarah was the only thing real in this mansion. Everything else, the wealth, the power, the intimidation, was just an illusion. But she was real. Collins had married women before, but not in this way. Those women had known what they were getting into. They had signed contracts, agreed to the terms of being his wife, embraced the lifestyle that came with his name. They had spent his money without hesitation. Sarah never did. She never asked for anything, never touched the expensive clothes in the walk-in closet, never once swiped the black Amex card that had been placed in her drawer. She acted like none of it belonged to her, because to her, it didn't. She treated the staff with kindness, spoke to them like they mattered. She learned their names, asked them about their lives, laughed with them in ways she never laughed with him. Collins wasn't sure why that bothered him so much, but it did, because it meant she was choosing to connect with everyone in the house except him. And that shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Collins sat in his office, swirling a glass of whiskey, watching Sarah on the screen. She was in the kitchen again, helping the cook prepare jollof rice, her sleeves rolled up, hair pulled into a loose bun. She was smiling, not at him, never at him. Collins exhaled sharply and set the glass down. For the past 2 weeks, he had tried to ignore this feeling, but it was eating at him. He had taken Sarah to punish her father, to maintain his dominance in the business world, to prove that debts had consequences. But now he wasn't sure if he was punishing her or himself. Collins wasn't a man who second-guessed his decisions, but as he watched Sarah laugh with the staff, her existence in his house feeling so tragically misplaced, a thought crept into his mind, a thought he never expected. Maybe it was time to let her go. Sarah had had enough. For weeks she had lived in this house, existing like a ghost, trapped in a marriage that didn't make sense. A wife in title only. A prisoner in a golden cage. She barely saw Collins. He was always gone before she woke up and returned long after she had gone to bed. It was as if he was purposely avoiding her. But why? She wasn't asking for love. She wasn't asking for affection. She just wanted to understand. Because the truth was, nothing made sense. If he had married her to punish her father, then why was he ignoring her? Why was he treating her like she didn't exist? Why had he taken her if he wanted nothing to do with her? The more she thought about it, the more the questions tormented her. And so that night she waited. For the first time since she came here, she stayed up, curled in the corner of the massive parlor, refusing to let him slip past her again. If he wasn't going to come to her, then she would wait for him. It was well past midnight when she heard the sound of car tires rolling into the driveway. Her heartbeat quickened. The front doors opened, and there he was. Collins walked in, his tie loosened, his crisp white shirt slightly wrinkled from the long day. He looked tired, but his presence still commanded power. And for the first time, Sarah was seeing him. Not through a screen, not in passing, but face to face. Collins barely glanced at her before turning away, as if she wasn't even there. But Sarah wasn't having that. She stood up and took a deep breath before walking toward him. "Good evening, Collins." His steps faltered slightly. For a split second, she thought she saw something flash in his eyes. Surprise? No, something deeper. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. He gave her a short nod. "Sarah." She stepped closer, determination in her voice. "Why did you marry me?" His entire body stilled. Sarah swallowed hard, ignoring the nervousness creeping up her throat. "Why did you do this? Why did you take me if you were only going to pretend I don't exist?" No answer. She clenched her fists. "Why do you avoid me like I'm a plague?" Silence. "Why don't you even recognize me as your wife?" Nothing. Sarah felt something in her chest snap. "I deserve an answer, Collins." Her voice cracked with frustration. "You can't just take me and act like I'm not here." Collins finally looked at her. Really looked at her. His gaze was unreadable, dark, intense, heavy with something unspoken. For a moment she thought he would finally give her the answers she needed. But instead, he turned away. Just like that. Just like he always did. Sarah watched as he walked past her without a word, heading toward his room. And just before he disappeared, she heard it. A whisper so soft, so quiet, she wasn't sure if she imagined it. If only she knew what she was doing to me. And then he was gone. Collins sat in his office, fingers tapping against the mahogany desk as he stared at the security feed. There she was, Sarah. For the past 5 months, she had become a constant in his life. Not as a wife, not as a partner, but as a presence he couldn't ignore. And God, he had tried. He had tried to shut her out, to pretend she didn't exist, to convince himself that this was just another deal, that taking her had been nothing more than a business decision. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Because now when he saw her, alone in the garden, curled up in the library, staring out the window like she was waiting for a freedom that would never come at hurt. And Collins Aboyi was not a man who allowed himself to feel pain. Tonight was no different. Sarah sat on the floor of the grand library, surrounded by books she wasn't reading. Her face was blank, her shoulders slumped, defeated. She had stopped asking questions weeks ago, stopped waiting up for him, stopped trying to understand why he had done this to her. She had simply given up. Collins leaned forward, elbows resting on his desk, his jaw clenching. For months he had told himself that he didn't care, that whatever she felt, hate, anger, despair, was not his problem. But tonight, for the first time, he let himself admit the truth. He had destroyed her, and he felt truly, deeply sorry. Collins exhaled sharply and stood. He needed to fix this, even if it meant letting her go. Sarah nearly dropped the book in her hands when she heard his voice. Sarah! She blinked, turning slowly. There he was. Collins stood at the entrance of the library, his broad frame silhouetted by the dim lighting, his dark eyes unreadable. It took her a second to process what had just happened. He had spoken to her, for the first time in 5 months. Sarah straightened, heart pounding. What do you want? He didn't move. Come to the study. We need to talk. Talk? Now after 5 months of nothing? Her first instinct was to refuse, to tell him that he had no right to suddenly decide he wanted to have a conversation. But something in his voice, something in his eyes made her hesitate, so she followed him. Collins sat on the edge of his desk, his hands clasped together. Sarah stood near the door, arms crossed, waiting. The silence stretched between them before he finally spoke. I feel terrible for forcing you into this marriage. His voice was low, steady. I never should have done it. Sarah's breath hitched. She had imagined this moment so many times. But now that it was happening, she didn't know how to react. She stared at him, searching for insincerity, manipulation, a trick. But for the first time, she saw guilt, real, unfiltered guilt. I know you hate me, Collins continued, his gaze locked on hers. And you have every right to, he exhaled. So I'm letting you go. Sarah froze. What? You're free to leave, Sarah. Your debt is paid. You don't owe me anything. She felt her body go cold. Was this a game? Was this some twisted test? You're lying, she whispered. Collins shook his head. I'm not. Sarah stared at him, searching his face, waiting for the catch. She had spent months trying to understand this man, and now he was suddenly giving her the one thing she wanted most? No, it didn't make sense. She narrowed her eyes. Just like that? I can walk out of here, and you won't stop me? Collins nodded. Just like that. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. You expect me to believe that? She crossed her arms. You've kept me here like a prisoner, avoided me like a plague, and now suddenly you're feeling guilty? His jaw tightened. I never wanted to break you. Sarah scoffed. Then why did you? Collins had no answer. He simply looked away, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, he admitted, but I do know this. Staying here isn't making you happy, and I can't keep pretending that I don't care. Sarah's heart pounded, confusion swirling inside her. She had prepared herself for everything, but not this. Not for Aboyi to admit fault. Not for him to set her free. The walls around her felt smaller now, and suddenly she knew exactly what she needed to do. "I'm leaving," she whispered. Collins's face remained unreadable. "Where will you go?" Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't want to go back to her father, to the man who had betrayed her, to the man who had sold her. So there was only one other place left. London. She squared her shoulders. "I'm going back to the UK." Collins nodded once, his face unreadable. "Then I'll arrange for your flight." Sarah swallowed hard. This was it. She was finally free. So why did it feel like she had just lost something she never even had? Aboyi had been feeling off for a while now. It started as a dull ache in his abdomen. Small, barely noticeable. It came and went, nothing too serious, nothing that could slow him down. He had ignored it, brushed it off like an inconvenience. After all, Collins didn't get sick, but then the discomfort became more frequent. It wasn't unbearable, just enough to make him pause sometimes, press a hand to his stomach, and breathe through it. He had meant to get it checked, but business came first. There were deals to finalize, contracts to sign, empires to expand. His body didn't have time to be weak, until today. Until he had slumped over in his office, the world spinning around him before everything went black. The first thing he registered was the sterile smell of an antiseptic, the rhythmic beeping of machines, the soft murmur of voices nearby. Collins' eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the harsh white lighting of the hospital room. A doctor stood at the foot of his bed, flipping through a chart. A nurse checked the IV connected to his arm. "What?" His voice was hoarse, heavy. The doctor looked up. "Mr. Aboyi, you're awake." Collins swallowed, trying to push himself up, but a sharp pain shot through his abdomen, making him tense. "You collapsed in your office," the doctor said, walking closer. "Your team rushed you here. We ran some tests." Collins barely listened. His mind was already trying to calculate how much time he had lost, how soon he could leave. He wasn't dying. This was nothing. He was about to demand his discharge when the doctor's next words froze him. "Your cancer is back." Silence. Collins stared at him. The words didn't register at first. Then they did, and the room felt smaller. His fingers curled into the sheets. "What did you say?" The doctor exhaled. "Your colon cancer has returned, Mr. Aboyi. It's at stage 1, which means we caught it early. But you need to start chemotherapy immediately." Collins felt nothing at first, just emptiness. He hadn't thought about his illness in years. He had fought it once, survived, and locked it away in the past, like a battle he had already won. But now, it was back. And this time he had no one. The last time he had gone through chemotherapy, his mother had been alive. She had been there for every appointment, every session, holding his hand when he was too weak to move, whispering promises of survival in his ear. She had been his anchor, but she was gone now. She had died 2 years ago, leaving behind an empty house and a colder sun. His father? Collins let out a bitter laugh in his head. Chief Aboyi had never been much of a father, more of a shadow that loomed over his childhood, too busy chasing power to ever stop and be a parent. Collins had always known how to be alone. He had built an empire without help, had crushed rivals without mercy, had become a man feared by all. But now he was just a man with an expiration date, a man staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was strong enough to do this again, to fight, to survive, to face death alone. The doctor was still talking, listing treatment plans, side effects, medical protocols. But Collins's mind had already wandered elsewhere. Sarah, she was leaving. He had told her to go, had convinced himself that he was doing the right thing. So why did he suddenly wish she wasn't going anywhere? "Mr. Aboyi," the doctor said, snapping him back to reality, "do you have any family or loved ones who should be informed?" Collins's jaw tightened. "No." The doctor hesitated. "Your wife." "She's leaving," Collins cut in, his voice sharp. "She won't be here." The doctor frowned. "Support is important during treatment, sir. Chemotherapy is difficult. It's not just about the body, it's about the mind. You'll need someone. Collins scoffed. He had never needed anyone. And yet as he sat there, gripping the hospital sheets, staring at a future where pain and sickness awaited him, he couldn't ignore the one thought pounding in his skull. I don't want to do this alone. But he had already made his choice, and soon Sarah would be gone. Sarah wandered through the lush garden, the scent of fresh roses and lavender filling the air. The evening sun cast golden hues across the sky, but her mind was far from the beauty around her. She was leaving soon. She had spent 5 months trapped in this marriage, longing for freedom, dreaming of the moment she would finally walk away. And yet, something inside her felt unsettled. As she walked past the hedge near the kitchen entrance, she heard voices. She froze. 2 of the older maids, Mama Grace and Evelyn. Their voices were hushed, filled with something that sounded too serious to ignore. Sarah hesitated, then stepped closer. "Poor Mr. Collins," Evelyn was saying, her voice laced with concern. "He collapsed in his office. They rushed him to the hospital." Sarah's brows furrowed. "Collapsed?" Mama Grace sighed. "The doctor confirmed it today. His cancer is back stage 1. They're starting chemotherapy immediately." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Cancer. The world around her blurred for a moment. She gripped the wooden fence beside her, heart pounding. Collins had cancer? Evelyn exhaled deeply. "I remember the last time he was sick. It was bad, Mama Grace. The treatment drained the life out of him. But he had his mother back then. She was his rock. She never left his side. She made sure he ate, that he slept, that he fought." Mama Grace nodded. That woman loved him more than anything. When she passed, something in him changed. He never got over it. Sarah felt something shift inside her. Collins had been battling this before. Alone, without a father who cared, without siblings, without a real family. And now, it was happening again. Her fingers curled into her palm, her breath shaky. Evelyn lowered her voice. "I know he's made his mistakes. I know he forced her into this marriage, but don't you think it's strange, Mama? Mr. Collins never does anything without a reason." Mama Grace sighed deeply before replying. "Evelyn, you don't have to tell me twice. I've been with Collins since he was a boy. I know him better than he knows himself. He might be ruthless. He might be powerful. But the Collins I know wouldn't have married her if he didn't already have an inkling of likeness toward her." Sarah's breath hitched. "A likeness?" Mama Grace continued, her voice softer now. "I know I might be asking for too much, but I truly hope she doesn't leave him now. He wouldn't survive this on his own." Evelyn nodded. "He's just a boy that needs love." Sarah felt her chest tighten. She took a step back, the voices fading, her mind spinning. She needed to think. She needed to breathe. Sarah didn't realize she had moved until she was standing right in front of Mama Grace. Both maids looked up, startled. Mama Grace's eyes softened immediately. "Ah, my dear." Sarah swallowed, trying to steady herself. "Is it true?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What you said about Collins?" Mama Grace sighed, stepping closer. "You weren't supposed to hear that, child." "But I did," Sarah whispered, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. "I need to know, Mama. Tell me the truth." Mama Grace exhaled deeply, looking at her with gentle eyes. She reached for Sarah's hands, holding them tightly. "Collins is many things, Sarah. He is feared. He is powerful. He has built an empire from nothing. But one thing he has never had is love." Sarah's throat tightened. "His mother was the only person who truly cared for him," Mama Grace continued. "And when she passed, something inside him broke. His father was never there. He was too busy chasing wealth. Collins grew up alone, learning that the only way to survive in this world was to take what he wanted." Sarah felt her chest ache at the words. "I know what he did to you was wrong," Mama Grace said, her voice filled with gentle honesty. He forced you into this marriage. He took your choices away, and I won't defend that. Sarah looked down. But I also know, Mama Grace's voice softened. Collins wouldn't have married you if he didn't already feel something for you. Sarah's head snapped up. That's not true. Mama Grace smiled sadly. Isn't it? Sarah's mind was spinning. If he cared, he wouldn't have avoided me. He wouldn't have ignored me for 5 months. Mama Grace nodded. And yet he let you go. Sarah froze. He set you free, didn't he? Mama Grace continued, her knowing gaze locking onto hers. If he only wanted to punish your father, if this was just about control, then why let you go? Sarah's lips parted, but she had no answer. Because Mama Grace was right. Collins had spent months keeping her at a distance, refusing to force her into anything beyond the marriage itself. And when she finally confronted him, when she demanded to know why he had married her, what had he done? He let her go. Sarah's heart pounded. Listen to me, child, Mama Grace said, squeezing her hands. Collins is sick. He's going to fight the hardest battle of his life, and for the first time he has no one to stand by him. Sarah swallowed hard. He might have forced you into this marriage, but the Collins I know wouldn't have done that if he didn't already feel something for you. I know I might be asking for too much. Mama Grace hesitated. Sarah held her breath. But you shouldn't leave him now, Mama Grace finished. He wouldn't survive this on his own. Sarah closed her eyes, her heartbeat ringing in her ears. A war raged inside her. She had every right to walk away. Collins had made his choices. He had hurt her. But the image of him alone in that hospital, fighting without a single soul to care for him, wouldn't leave her mind. Could she really walk away? Or had fate already made her choice for her? Collins Aboyi walked into the mansion that night looking utterly exhausted, more than Sarah had ever seen him before. His usual imposing presence felt dimmed his steps slower, his broad shoulders carrying a weight too heavy to bear. His tie was already loosened, his crisp white shirt slightly wrinkled, and there was something hollow in his dark eyes. He looked like a man who had been fighting a silent war all day and had lost. Sarah was waiting for him in the living room, just like she had done so many nights before. Usually he ignored her. Tonight was no different. The moment he saw her, he turned away, heading toward the stairs like she wasn't even there. But tonight, Sarah wasn't letting him pass. Collins. Her voice was soft but firm, stopping him in his tracks. He sighed heavily, not turning around. Sarah, it's late. Please, she said, standing up. Just sit with me for a moment. Something in her voice must have caught him off guard because for the first time in months he hesitated. Then without a word he walked over and sat down on the opposite couch, resting his elbows on his knees. His fingers ran through his hair in frustration. Sarah took a deep breath. I know, she whispered. Collins glanced up, his brows furrowing. Know what? She held his gaze. That you're sick. His entire body stiffened. For the first time, Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes, shock, then anger, then something unreadable. Who told you? His voice was low-controlled, but she could hear the tension beneath it. It doesn't matter. Sarah shook her head. I know everything. I know your cancer is back. I know you've started treatment. She swallowed hard. And I know you have no one. Collins exhaled sharply, leaning back into the couch, rubbing his temple. Sarah, I'm staying. His head snapped up. What? I'm staying, Collins, she said again, her voice steady. I have a duty as your wife, and I won't leave you now. Collins let out a dry, humorless laugh, shaking his head. You don't have to do this. I already told you. You're free. You don't owe me anything. Sarah clenched her hands into fists. This wasn't about owing. This isn't about the marriage, she whispered. It's about you. Collins' eyes darkened, his jaw clenching. I will be by your side, Sarah continued. I will help you through this. And when you get better, I'll leave. His nostrils flared. Sarah, I've made up my mind. Collins stood up abruptly, running a hand through his hair. His exhaustion was evident, but so was his frustration. "Sarah, you don't want to do this." His voice was sharp, but there was something almost pleading in it. She rose to her feet, stepping closer. "Maybe I don't. Maybe I never wanted any of this." Her voice softened. "But I choose to stay, because no one deserves to go through this alone." Collins turned away, hands on his hips, his breathing heavy. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in the quietest voice she had ever heard from him, he whispered, "Sarah, you should go." Sarah swallowed the lump in her throat. He was scared. Collins Aboyi, ruthless billionaire, feared businessman, the man who had once controlled her entire life, was afraid. And for the first time, she saw the truth. He didn't want her to stay, because he didn't want her to see him weak. But Sarah had already made her decision. She wasn't going anywhere. That night was a long night for Sarah. She couldn't sleep, not after everything she had just learned, not after seeing the way Collins had looked at her when he told her to leave. He didn't want her to stay, but not because he hated her. He was afraid, and Sarah knew fear better than most. She had studied it. She had counseled people through it. She had lived it. But now she wasn't just a psychologist. She was a wife, even if this marriage had been forced, even if they had spent months avoiding each other. And no matter what he thought, she wasn't going to let him go through this alone. By midnight, Sarah was on the phone with Collins's doctor. She needed details. She needed a plan. "I know he won't tell me himself," she said, her voice calm but firm. "So I need you to tell me everything. His appointments, his treatments, what I can do to make this easier for him." The doctor hesitated. "Mrs. Aboyi, your husband." "I don't care what he wants," she cut in. "I need the information." After a long pause, the doctor sighed and gave her everything. Collins had his first round of chemotherapy in 2 days. The schedule was grueling sessions every 2 weeks, dietary changes, routine checkups, emotional strain. Sarah listened carefully, writing everything down. When the call ended, she went straight to work. Sarah curled up in bed with her laptop, pulling up everything she could find about colon cancer treatment, nutrition, mental support, and aftercare. She made lists: foods to help with nausea meals that would boost his immune system, techniques to help with stress and fatigue, psychological approaches to dealing with terminal anxiety. She knew the medical side of things, but what Collins needed more than anything was emotional support. And if there was one thing she knew how to do, it was talk someone through a battle they weren't ready to fight. She sighed, rubbing her eyes. The weight of the situation pressed down on her, but she refused to let it break her. She had spent 5 months feeling powerless. Not anymore. This was something she could do. She might not be able to take the pain away, but she could be there. She could make it easier. And whether Collins wanted it or not, he was no longer fighting alone. Sarah balanced the tray of food carefully as she made her way up the grand staircase, her heart beating steadily against her ribs. Collins had stopped going to the office since his chemotherapy started. The once untouchable businessman had been forced to work from home, his body too weak to handle his usual routine. But even in his sickness, he refused to ask for help. So Sarah took it upon herself to do what she could. She had learned his patterns over the past week. He barely ate, barely slept. And if he wasn't working, he was locked in his room, suffering in silence. Sarah sighed, adjusting the tray in her hands. He needed to eat. She knocked lightly on the bedroom door. "Collins?" No answer. She frowned, pushing the door open. The tray nearly slipped from her hands as her stomach dropped. Collins was on the floor, doubled over, his body racked with pain. His normally strong frame was curled in on itself, his broad shoulders trembling, his forehead damp with sweat. His jaw was clenched so tightly that his lips had turned white, but even that couldn't stop the agonizing groans from escaping his mouth. Sarah's breath hitched. She had never seen him like this before. Not once in the 5 months she had been in this house. Not even on the worst days of his cold indifference. This wasn't Collins Aboyi, the powerful billionaire, the untouchable businessman. This was a man in pain. And he was alone. Until now. Sarah dropped the tray of food on the nearest table and ran to his side. "Collins?" She crouched down, reaching out instinctively. His body was burning up, his skin hot to the touch. "Don't!" His voice was weak, breathless, but still stubborn. Sarah ignored him. "You need help." She grabbed her phone and immediately called for the driver. But the moment Collins let out another deep groan, clutching his abdomen, like he was being ripped apart from the inside. She knew there was no time to wait. She grabbed his arm and hoisted it over her shoulders, her heart hammering. "Come on," she whispered urgently. "I'm taking you to the hospital." Collins didn't argue, which terrified her even more. Sarah drove like a madwoman. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Collins sat in the passenger seat, his head leaned back, eyes half-lidded with pain. "Just a little longer," she murmured, glancing at him, panic creeping up her throat. She didn't realize she was shaking. When they arrived at the hospital, doctors and nurses rushed to him immediately. Sarah stood frozen at the entrance of the emergency room, her heart racing as she watched them wheel him away. For the first time since she had married Collins Aboyi, she felt helpless. This man had turned her world upside down, had stolen her choices, forced her into a life she never wanted. But now, standing outside the hospital room, all she could think was, "Please don't die." After what felt like an eternity, the doctor finally emerged. Sarah rushed forward. "Is he okay?" she demanded, her voice barely steady. The doctor adjusted his glasses. "We managed to stabilize him, but his condition is worsening. His immune system is weak from the chemotherapy, and the pain will only get worse from here." Sarah swallowed hard. The doctor sighed, crossing his arms. "Frankly, Mrs. Aboyi, I strongly advise that he stays in the hospital from now on. He needs round-the-clock care." Sarah knew Collins would hate that, but she also knew he had no choice. She nodded. "Okay, he'll stay." The doctor gave her a knowing look. "And you? Will you stay?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes." And from that moment on, she was by his side. Sarah had never expected to stay this long. She had told herself she would only be here until he got better, that it was just temporary. But 5 months had passed, and she was still here. Sarah became a fixture in Collins's hospital room. She helped him take his medications, sitting beside him as he swallowed each bitter pill. She fed him when he was too weak to lift a spoon, making sure he ate, even when he had no appetite. She sat with him during every chemotherapy session, holding his hand as the IV dripped into his veins. And when the nights got too hard, when the pain got too much, she would crawl into bed beside him. She would wrap her arms around him, her warmth soothing the cold fear he refused to admit he felt. Collins never asked her to stay, but she never left. In the 5 months he had been in the hospital, Collins had only received 2 visitors, his father and Eric, his best friend. His father came twice. Each time he only stayed 15 minutes. He would sit stiffly by the bed, talk briefly about business, and then leave. No words of encouragement, no warmth, just obligation. Sarah had watched the whole thing, biting back her anger. She saw how Collins shut down when his father was in the room. She saw how his fingers curled into fists under the sheets, how his expression went blank, how the moment his father left, he would exhale like he had been suffocating. But Eric was different. Eric came almost every week. Sometimes he stayed for hours, talking, joking, making Collins laugh when no one else could. On days Sarah needed to go home for a quick shower or pick up food, Eric would sit with him. "I don't know how you do it," Eric told Sarah one evening as they stood outside the hospital room. "Most people would have run away by now." Sarah had looked at Collins through the glass window, watching as he stared out at nothing, his body thinner, weaker. "I'm not most people," she whispered, and she wasn't. One night after an especially brutal chemotherapy session, Collins was too weak to talk, too weak to even lift his head. Sarah crawled into bed beside him, like she had done so many times before. He didn't fight her, didn't push her away. She wrapped her arms around him, her body molding to his, her warmth cutting through the pain. Collins turned his head slightly, his heavy-lidded eyes watching her in the dim hospital light. For months he had been asking himself the same question. Why was she still here? Why was she taking care of him? Why was she feeding him, holding him, comforting him, staying when she had every reason to leave? He had forced her into this marriage, had given her an escape, and yet she chose to stay. Collins swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He had spent his entire life alone. His mother had been his only source of love, and when she died, he had accepted that he would never be loved again. But then there was Sarah. Her fingers gently ran through his hair, her breath warm against his skin. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to care. But she did. Collins closed his eyes for a moment, then slowly opened them again. And he prayed. He prayed that she would never leave him. Ever. The morning air was crisp when the bell rang for Collins. Sarah sat up in her chair, her heart pounding with anticipation as the nurse walked in with a warm smile. "Mr. Aboyi," she said, "you're officially discharged. You're free to go home." Collins let out a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the sheets. For the past 6 months, this hospital had been his reality. The beeping of machines, the sterile white walls, the quiet hum of nurses passing by. And Sarah, always Sarah. She had been his constant, his strength when he had none left. And now, they were going home. Sarah's hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel as she drove him home. She couldn't stop smiling. It was like a weight had been lifted, like she had been holding her breath for 6 months and could finally exhale. He was well. He had made it. Every painful night, every hospital meal she had forced him to eat, every moment she had spent holding him through the worst of it, it had all led to this. "You're happy," Collins murmured beside her, watching her with quiet intensity. Sarah laughed softly. "Of course I am. Aren't you?" Collins exhaled, glancing out the window. "I don't know what I feel." Sarah's fingers tightened on the wheel. She knew. She had seen what this had done to him. Cancer had broken something in him, and she had been there every step of the way. "You're alive," she said gently. "That's what matters." Collins turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked like a man who wanted to say something but didn't know how. Instead, he simply nodded. Back at the mansion, Sarah didn't stop caring for him. She made sure he followed every aftercare instruction the doctors had given. She made sure he ate on time, took his vitamins, and rested. And every time he tried to go back to working too much, she was there reminding him, scolding him, caring for him in ways he wasn't used to. Collins let her, and that scared him. Something had changed between them while at the hospital. He felt it. She felt it. But neither of them was brave enough to say it out loud. Sarah never thought she would want to stay. Not in this house, not with the man who had once taken away her freedom. But things were different now. They had both been broken. Collins, by his illness, by his past, by his loneliness. Sarah, by the betrayal of her father, by a life that had never truly been hers. And somehow, they had found happiness in the most unconventional way. She wanted to stay, not just to take care of him, not just as his nurse or caretaker or companion. She wanted to stay as his wife, to be his family, to belong here with him. But she was afraid to admit it. Because what if he didn't feel the same? What if he still only saw her as a debt repaid, a duty fulfilled? What if this thing between them wasn't real? Collins watched her from across the room, his heart pounding. She had been his rock through all of it. She had held him, comforted him, fought for him when he was too weak to fight for himself. And now she was still here. He wanted her to stay, but he was afraid to ask. She had done enough. She had sacrificed her time, her energy, her life for him. He didn't want to burden her anymore, didn't want her to feel obligated to him. But God help him, he couldn't imagine waking up without her here, without her smile, without her voice nagging him about resting, without the way she held him when he needed it most. Collins clenched his fists. He wanted her, not as a contract, not as a forced wife, but as his, and yet the words wouldn't come. So instead, all he whispered under his breath was, "Please don't leave me." But Sarah never heard him. Collins sat at his desk, staring at the blank sheet of paper before him, his heart heavy with an unfamiliar weight. For the past month, Sarah had been there taking care of him as if it was the most natural thing in the world. She had been his rock, his warmth, his peace, and that was precisely why he had to let her go. She had already sacrificed too much. She had given him months of her life, her energy, her time, her heart, even if she hadn't realized it yet. Collins ran a hand through his hair and exhaling sharply. He wanted to keep her, but what kind of man would he be if he did? She deserved more than a broken man with a past full of scars. She deserved to be free, to start her life, to see the world, chase her dreams, build a future that had nothing to do with a forced marriage to a man like him. So instead of saying the words to her face, because he knew he wouldn't be able to handle it, he picked up the pen and began to write the letter. "Sarah, by the time you wake up and read this, I'll already be gone for the morning. This letter is not easy for me to write, but it's something I've thought about for a long time. I don't deserve the kindness you've given me. You stayed by my side when you had every reason to walk away. You were there through the worst of it, when I was at my weakest, when I had nothing left to give, and for that I will always be grateful. But I need you to do something for me now. I need you to leave. You've already given me more than I could ever repay. I don't want to hold you back anymore. There's a whole world out there waiting for you, Sarah. You deserve to see it, to live it, to be free. I've arranged everything. The bank transfer is set, and I've left a check for you, enough to travel the world, to start over however you see fit. Please go. Don't stay because you feel obligated to me. I will never forget you. Collins." Collins folded the letter, slipping the thick envelope inside. He placed it carefully on her bedside table, just beside the lamp she always kept on at night. And then, before he could change his mind, he walked away. Sarah woke up with the sunlight streaming through the massive windows, stretching lazily before turning toward her bedside. That was when she saw it, the envelope. Her brows furrowed as she sat up, reaching for it slowly. She unfolded the letter and began to read. With every sentence, her heart pounded harder. With every word, her hands shook with anger. By the time she reached the end, she was furious. She threw the letter onto the bed and ripped open the envelope. Inside was a fat check. Sarah's stomach twisted. Her eyes burned with frustration. Was this what he thought of her? That she had stayed for him out of obligation? That she had cared for him out of pity? And worse, was he paying her off? A bitter laugh escaped her lips, but there was no humor in it. She had spent months loving him without realizing it, and this was how he repaid her? Sarah stood up, pacing the room, her hands clenched into fists. How dare he? How dare he assume she wanted to leave? Did he really think she had been waiting for an excuse to escape? She wanted to stay. She wanted him, not for money, not for obligation, but because somewhere along the way he had become her home. Sarah grabbed the check and the letter, storming out of the bedroom. She had something to say to her husband, and this time he was going to listen. Sarah paced the living room, her hands clenched into fists, her heart pounding with frustration. She had spent the entire day waiting for Collins to return, waiting to confront him, waiting to tell him exactly how she felt. The letter was still in her hand, now wrinkled from how many times she had crushed and uncrushed it in her grip. The check was lying on the coffee table, untouched, unwanted. He thought she wanted money, that she wanted an escape. She wanted him, and now she was going to make sure he understood that. The front door swung open just as her anger reached its peak. Collins stepped in, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled, his dark eyes unfocused as he rubbed a hand down his face. Sarah immediately knew he had been drinking. The slight sway in his step, the faint scent of whiskey clinging to his clothes. Her frustration only grew. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped, marching toward him. Collins blinked, startled by her tone. "Sarah, you were drinking," she accused, cutting him off. "You're not supposed to be drinking, Collins. You're barely out of treatment." He sighed, rubbing his temple. It was just a little. It doesn't matter if it was just a little, she shot back. You just spent 6 months fighting for your life, and now you're throwing it away? Do you think that's fair? Collins exhaled deeply, his posture tense. Sarah, I don't need a lecture right now. Oh, really? She grabbed the letter from the table, waving it in his face. So you think you can just drink and avoid your problems while you write this bullshit goodbye letter and expect me to leave like a good little girl? Collins went rigid. His drunken haze seemed to vanish instantly as his eyes locked into the letter. Sarah. No, she cut him off. I'm talking now. She stepped closer, anger and hurt twisting together in her chest. How dare you? She whispered, her voice shaking. How dare you try to push me away after everything? Collins swallowed hard, looking away. Why? She demanded. Why did you do it? Why couldn't you just tell me to my face? His jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists. Because I couldn't, he admitted, his voice hoarse, raw. Sarah's breath caught. Collins ran a hand down his face, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. I couldn't look at you and tell you to go, he murmured. I couldn't. His voice cracked slightly. I wrote the letter because if I said it out loud, I wouldn't have been able to let you go. Sarah's chest tightened. Collins took a shaky breath, his dark eyes finally meeting hers. Do you know how hard it was to write that letter, Sarah? His voice was desperate now, almost pleading. Do you know how much it killed me to tell you to leave? Sarah felt her heart break. She had spent so much time being angry that she hadn't stopped to think about how much it must have hurt him too. His voice was barely above a whisper when he asked, Why did you stay? Sarah's lips parted, her hands shaking. She took a deep breath, her emotions crashing into her all at once. Because I wanted to, she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. Because I didn't want to leave you. Because I love taking care of you, making sure you're okay. Collins took a step forward, his breathing uneven. Sarah swallowed, forcing herself to say the words that had been sitting in her chest for months. Because I want to be your rock, she whispered. Because I want to be your lover, your wife. Collins staggered slightly as if her words had physically hit him. Sarah stared at him, her hands clenching at her sides, her heart pounding. I want to stay, she whispered. I want asterisk, asterisk. You Collins stood there frozen, staring at Sarah like she had just unraveled his entire world. Her words echoed in his head, sinking deep into the parts of him that had long been abandoned. I want to stay. I want you. He hadn't expected her to say it, hadn't dared to believe that she wanted him, not out of duty, not out of pity, but because she truly wanted to be here, with him. Collins took a shaky step forward, his gaze locked onto hers. His fingers lifted slowly, hesitant at first, then firm as they cupped her face. Sarah shivered under his touch, her body leaning into him instinctively. Say it again, he whispered. Sarah swallowed hard, her hands rising to rest on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. I want to stay, she whispered again. I want you. A sound escaped Collins, half a groan, half a sigh of pure relief. And then, before she could say anything else, his lips crashed onto hers. The kiss was everything, magical, desperate, like they had been waiting their whole lives for this moment. Collins pulled her closer, his hands gripping her waist, his body pressing flush against hers. Sarah melted into him, her fingers threading through his hair, holding him like she would never let go. Because she wouldn't. She never wanted to. Their kiss deepened, their breaths mingling, their bodies speaking a language older than words. And when Collins lifted her into his arms and carried her toward their bedroom, neither of them hesitated. There was no fear, no doubt, no walls between them anymore. Collins laid Sarah onto the bed with reverence, like she was something precious, like she was something he had been waiting for all his life. His eyes roamed over her, dark and intense, filled with so much emotion it made her shiver. You're mine, he whispered, tracing his fingers over her lips. And I'm yours. Sarah nodded, her own hands exploring him, memorizing the feel of the man she had come to love. No words were needed after that. They loved each other the way they were meant to. Familiar, like they had done this 1,000 times before. Intense, like they were making up for all the time they had wasted. Magical, like they were exactly where they were supposed to be, in each other's arms, loving each other, being husband and wife in the truest sense. As Sarah lay wrapped in Collins's embrace, their bodies still tangled together, she pressed a kiss to his chest, her heart full. Collins ran his fingers through her hair, holding her close, his lips brushing the top of her head. They had been broken once, but they had found each other, and now neither of them would ever be alone again. Sarah smiled against his skin, whispering the only words that mattered. I'm never leaving you. Collins tightened his hold on her, pressing a final, lingering kiss against her forehead. Good, he murmured. Because she was his home, and he was hers. Forever. The end.